Diana, you've completed your job. Mama's gone now, so there's no reason for you to stay in this family. Those words cut through me like ice as I stood in the living room where I had spent 8 years caring for my mother-in-law, Margaret, through her devastating battle with Alzheimer's disease. The same room where I had fed her, bathed her, held her during her confused and frightened moments, and loved her like my own mother. Now, just 3 days after Margaret's funeral, my husband Robert and his 3 siblings were treating me like a hired caregiver whose contract had expired. The house belongs to the family, Robert's sister Janet continued coldly. We've decided to sell it and split the proceeds among Margaret's biological children. I looked around at the faces of people I had considered family for 15 years, people I had sacrificed my career, my health, and my social life to support during the most difficult period of their lives. "What about our marriage?" I whispered to Robert. "What marriage? We've been more like roommates for years. You were here for Mom, not for me." If you've ever sacrificed everything to care for someone else's family only to be discarded when your usefulness ended, stay with me. When I married Robert 15 years ago, I thought I was gaining not just a husband, but a loving, extended family. Margaret, his mother, had welcomed me with open arms, treating me like the daughter she'd never had. She was vibrant, intelligent, and full of life, a retired teacher who volunteered at the local library and maintained a beautiful garden that was the envy of the neighborhood. Robert was the youngest of 4 children, and while his siblings had moved away for their careers, he had stayed close to home, partly out of love for his mother, and partly because his job as an accountant at a local firm provided stability and good benefits. I was a nurse at the regional hospital, and together we had built a comfortable life in the small town where Robert had grown up. The first signs of Margaret's decline appeared when she was 72. She began forgetting appointments, repeating stories, and struggling with tasks that had once been second nature. Initially, we attributed it to normal aging, but as the symptoms worsened, we knew we needed answers. The diagnosis of early-stage Alzheimer's disease hit our family like a devastating blow. Margaret, who had always been sharp and independent, was facing a future of progressive cognitive decline. The doctor explained that while medications might slow the progression, there was no cure, and she would eventually need full-time care. "We'll face this together," Robert promised his mother, holding her hand as she cried in the doctor's office. "You won't go through this alone." I made the same promise, not knowing then how completely it would reshape my life. Initially, Margaret's care needs were minimal. She could still live independently with some supervision and reminders. Robert and I took turns checking on her daily, managing her medications, and helping with household tasks. Her siblings, Janet, Michael, and David, lived in different states but visited regularly and contributed financially to her care. But as the disease progressed, Margaret's needs became more complex and demanding. She began wandering at night, forgetting to eat, and becoming confused about where she was and who people were. The day we found her walking down the highway in her nightgown, not knowing how she had gotten there, we knew that living alone was no longer safe. "She needs to move in with us," I told Robert. "We can't risk her getting hurt." He was hesitant. "Diana, you don't understand what you're signing up for. Alzheimer's only gets worse. This could go on for years." "She's your mother, and she's been like a mother to me. We'll figure it out together." The decision to move Margaret into our home changed everything. I converted our guest room into a bedroom suitable for her needs, installing safety features and removing anything that could be dangerous. I researched Alzheimer's care, attended support groups, and learned about managing the behavioral changes that came with the disease. As Margaret's primary caregiver, I gradually reduced my hours at the hospital, eventually taking early retirement to provide full-time care. The financial sacrifice was significant. My nursing salary had been substantial, but Robert's siblings agreed to contribute monthly payments to help offset the lost income. The early months were challenging but manageable. Margaret still had good days when she was lucid and engaged, and I treasured those moments of connection. She would tell me stories about Robert's childhood, share family recipes, and express gratitude for the care I was providing. "You're an angel," she would say during her clearer moments. "I don't know what we would do without you." But as the disease progressed, those moments became rarer. Margaret began experiencing sundowning, increased confusion and agitation in the evening hours. She would become convinced that strangers were in the house, that I was trying to poison her food, or that she needed to go home to care for children who had been adults for decades. The physical demands of her care intensified as well. She needed help with bathing, dressing, and using the bathroom. She required constant supervision to prevent wandering or accidents. Sleep became a luxury as she often woke multiple times during the night, confused and frightened. Robert tried to help, but his work schedule and his own emotional struggle with watching his mother decline made him less available than I needed him to be. His siblings visited when they could, but their careers and families in other states limited their involvement to occasional weekends and holiday visits. "I don't know how you do it," Janet would say during her visits. "I could never handle this level of care." "Mom is lucky to have you," Michael would add. "You're so much better at this than any of us would be." Their praise felt good, but I was beginning to understand that their admiration came with an unspoken expectation that I would continue to shoulder the primary responsibility for their mother's care because I was better at it than they were. As Margaret's condition worsened, I found myself becoming increasingly isolated. Friends stopped inviting me to social events because I couldn't leave Margaret alone. My own family relationships suffered as I had less time and energy to maintain connections. Even my marriage to Robert began to strain under the constant stress and demands of caregiving. "I feel like I've lost my wife," Robert complained during one of our rare private conversations. "You're so focused on Mom that there's nothing left for us." "Your mother needs me," I replied, exhausted from another sleepless night. "This is temporary. When she's gone, we'll have time for each other again." But Robert seemed to resent the sacrifice I was making for his family. Instead of appreciating my dedication, he began to withdraw emotionally, spending more time at work and with friends, leaving me alone with his mother's increasingly demanding care needs. The siblings' financial contributions also began to dwindle as the years passed. "We have our own families to support," David explained when he reduced his monthly payment. "Besides, Diana is doing such a good job, and she's getting free room and board." Free room and board. As if caring for their mother was a privilege rather than a sacrifice. By the 5th year of Margaret's illness, I was providing round-the-clock care for a woman who no longer recognized me, who sometimes became violent when confused, and who required assistance with every aspect of daily living. I had developed chronic back problems from lifting and moving her, suffered from depression and anxiety, and had gained significant weight from stress eating and lack of exercise. But I continued because I loved Margaret, because I had made a promise, and because I believed that family took care of family, regardless of the cost. What I didn't realize was that Robert and his siblings had already begun to see me not as family, but as a convenient solution to a problem they didn't want to handle. I wasn't Margaret's daughter-in-law who was making a loving sacrifice. I was the designated caregiver who was fulfilling her assigned role. The betrayal that was coming would shatter not just my marriage, but my understanding of what family really meant to the people I had given everything to serve. Margaret's final year was the most heartbreaking and exhausting period of my life. The vibrant, intelligent woman who had welcomed me into her family had disappeared completely, replaced by someone who lived in a world of confusion, fear, and physical decline. She no longer spoke coherently, required total assistance with eating and personal care, and often didn't recognize any of us. I had become her constant companion, sleeping in a chair beside her bed, monitoring her breathing, administering medications, and providing comfort during her increasingly frequent episodes of distress. The physical and emotional toll was devastating. I had lost 30 pounds from stress and exhaustion, developed chronic insomnia, and rarely left the house except for medical appointments. Robert had become increasingly distant during this period, often working late or spending weekends with friends. When I tried to talk to him about my exhaustion and need for support, he would dismiss my concerns. "You chose this," he would say. "No one forced you to take care of her." His siblings visited less frequently as Margaret's condition worsened, claiming that seeing her in such a state was too difficult for them. They left the daily reality of her care entirely to me, while continuing to make decisions about her medical treatment and future planning from a distance. When Margaret finally passed away peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in March, I felt a complex mix of grief and relief. I mourned the loss of the woman who had been like a mother to me, but I was also grateful that her suffering had ended and that the exhausting demands of her care were over. The funeral was beautiful, filled with stories about Margaret's life as a teacher, mother, and community member. Robert's siblings spoke eloquently about their mother's legacy and the love she had shown her family. I sat in the front row, holding Robert's hand, believing that we would now have the opportunity to rebuild our marriage and our life together. But the conversation that took place 3 days after the funeral shattered that illusion completely. Robert's siblings had come to the house to discuss practical matters: the disposal of Margaret's belongings, the sale of the house, and the distribution of her assets. I assumed I would be included in these discussions as part of the family. But instead, I found myself being treated like an outsider whose presence was no longer needed. "Diana, we want to thank you for everything you did for Mom," Janet began, her tone formal and distant. "You provided excellent care, and we're grateful for your service." Service? The word hit me like a slap. 8 years of love, sacrifice, and devotion reduced to service, as if I had been a paid employee rather than a family member. "But now that Mom is gone," Michael continued, "we need to make some decisions about the future. We've decided to sell the house and divide the proceeds among Mom's children." "What about Diana?" I asked, confused. "This has been our home for 8 years." "You can stay until the house sells," David said generously. "That should give you time to find somewhere else to live." I looked at Robert, expecting him to defend me, to remind his siblings that I was his wife and had sacrificed everything for their mother's care. Instead, he avoided my eyes and remained silent. "Robert?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's happening here?" He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was not love or gratitude, but something that looked almost like resentment. "Diana, we need to be honest about our situation. Our marriage has been more of a caregiving arrangement than a real partnership for years. You were here for Mom, not for me." The words felt like a physical blow. I was here for both of you. I was here for our family. "But we're not really family anymore," Janet said, matter-of-factly. "You were Mom's caregiver, and now that job is finished. It's time for everyone to move on with their lives." The conversation that followed was surreal. Robert's siblings discussed the house sale, the distribution of Margaret's belongings, and their plans for the future as if I weren't there. When I tried to participate or ask questions, they would politely but firmly redirect the conversation among themselves. Robert said very little, but his silence spoke volumes. He wasn't going to defend me, wasn't going to acknowledge my sacrifice, wasn't going to fight for our marriage or my place in the family. I had served my purpose, and now I was being dismissed. That night, I lay in the bed that I had shared with Robert for 15 years, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had happened. The people I had considered family, the people I had sacrificed my career and health for, had revealed that they saw me as nothing more than a convenient caregiver whose usefulness had expired. The financial reality was devastating. I had no savings. Every penny had gone toward household expenses in Margaret's care. I had no current income. I had given up my nursing career years earlier. I had no home. The house had belonged to Margaret's estate and would be sold. I had no retirement savings. I had cashed out my accounts to help with expenses during the early years of Margaret's illness. At 55 years old, I was facing the prospect of starting over with nothing. No money, no job, no home, no family support. The 8 years I had spent caring for Margaret had left me professionally obsolete, financially destitute, and emotionally devastated. The isolation was crushing. The few friends I had maintained contact with during Margaret's illness were shocked by Robert's behavior, but seemed unsure how to help. My own family lived across the country and had their own challenges. I felt completely alone in a world that had moved on without me. The worst part was the silence in the house. For 8 years, my days had been filled with the constant demands of caregiving, medications to administer, meals to prepare, crises to manage. Now, suddenly, there was nothing. No one needed me, no one depended on me, no one even acknowledged my existence. I wandered through the rooms where I had spent so many years caring for Margaret, touching the furniture we had moved to accommodate her wheelchair, looking at the photos that chronicled her decline. The house felt like a museum of my former life, a place where I had once had purpose and meaning, but now was just a ghost haunting my own memories. Robert continued to live in the house, but treated me like a temporary guest whose departure was eagerly anticipated. He made no effort to discuss our marriage, our future, or even the practical details of our separation. He simply waited for me to leave, as if my departure was inevitable and my feelings irrelevant. The legal consultation I sought was devastating. Because I had never been formally employed as Margaret's caregiver, I had no legal claim to compensation for my years of service. Because the house had been in Margaret's name, I had no ownership rights despite living there for 8 years. Because Robert and I had kept our finances separate and I had contributed my savings to household expenses during the early years of Margaret's illness, I had no claim to marital assets. Unfortunately, the attorney explained, generosity and sacrifice aren't legally binding. You provided care voluntarily, and while that was admirable, it doesn't create any legal obligations on their part. The silence in my life became deafening. Days passed without meaningful human contact, without purpose, without hope. I felt like I had disappeared from the world, erased as completely as if I had never existed. But in that silence, something else began to emerge. Not just grief and despair, but anger. Anger at being used and discarded. Anger at sacrificing everything for people who saw me as disposable. Anger at allowing myself to be so completely dependent on others' approval and acceptance. For 8 years, I had defined myself entirely through my role as Margaret's caregiver and Robert's wife. Now that those roles were gone, I had to discover who I was when I wasn't serving someone else's needs. The woman who had been dismissed as having completed her job was about to discover that her most important work was just beginning. 6 weeks after Margaret's funeral, I sat in the empty bedroom where I had cared for her for 8 years, surrounded by boxes of my belongings and facing the most difficult decision of my life. I could fight for my place in this family,
beg Robert to remember our marriage vows, plead with his siblings to acknowledge my sacrifice. Or I could accept that they had shown me exactly who they were and choose to build a life that didn't depend on their recognition or approval. The decision came to me with startling clarity as I held one of Margaret's photographs, a picture of her teaching a classroom full of children, her face radiant with purpose and joy. She had dedicated her life to educating others, to making a difference in the world through service that mattered. In her honor, I would not waste another moment begging for scraps of affection from people who had already decided I was worthless. I would let go of everything: the marriage that had become a sham, the family that had never truly accepted me, the house that had never really been my home. I would start over completely, and I would build something that honored both Margaret's memory and my own worth. The conversation with Robert was brief and final. I found him in the living room, watching television, as if nothing had changed, as if the woman who had sacrificed 8 years of her life for his family wasn't about to walk out of his life forever. "I'm leaving," I announced. "I found an apartment across town and I'll be out by the weekend." He looked up, surprised. "You don't have to leave so quickly. We said you could stay until the house sells." "I don't want to stay. I don't want to fight for a place in a family that doesn't want me. I don't want to beg for recognition from people who see my love as a job I was hired to do." "Diana, you're being dramatic. We appreciate everything you did for Mom." "No, Robert. You appreciated having someone else handle the difficult parts of your life so you didn't have to. You appreciated having a free caregiver so you could maintain your comfortable distance from your mother's illness. But you never appreciated me as a person, as your wife, as someone whose sacrifice deserved respect and gratitude." He was quiet for a moment, perhaps recognizing the truth in my words. "What will you do?" "I'm going to rebuild my life," I said simply. "I'm going to take everything I learned from caring for your mother and use it to help other people who are facing similar challenges. I'm going to turn my experience into something meaningful and valuable." "You're 55 years old," he said, and I heard something that might have been concern or might have been condescension. "Starting over at your age won't be easy. Neither was caring for your mother while you pretended she wasn't dying, but I managed that just fine." The apartment I rented was tiny, a one-bedroom unit in a complex that catered to seniors and people starting over after major life changes. It was nothing like the spacious house I was leaving, but it was mine, paid for with the small amount of money I had managed to save from selling my car and some jewelry. The first few weeks in my new home were the loneliest of my life. After 8 years of constant caregiving, the silence and emptiness felt overwhelming. I had no routine, no purpose, no one depending on me. I would wake up in the morning with nothing to do and nowhere to be. But gradually, I began to see the silence not as emptiness, but as possibility. For the first time in 8 years, I could make decisions based on my own needs and interests rather than someone else's care requirements. I could eat when I was hungry, sleep when I was tired, and pursue activities that brought me joy rather than just fulfilling obligations. I started by taking care of my own health, which had suffered terribly during the years of caregiving. I found a doctor who understood the physical and emotional toll of long-term caregiving and began addressing the chronic pain, depression, and exhaustion that had become my constant companions. I also began researching career options for someone with my background and experience. While my nursing license had lapsed, my 8 years of hands-on experience with Alzheimer's care had given me knowledge and skills that were increasingly valuable as the population aged and more families faced similar challenges. I discovered that there was a growing field of geriatric care management, professionals who helped families navigate the complex world of elder care, from medical decisions to living arrangements to emotional support. The work required certification and training, but it dealt on exactly the kind of experience I had gained during Margaret's illness. I enrolled in a certification program for aging life care managers, using the last of my savings to pay for the courses. The program was intensive and challenging, covering everything from healthcare systems to legal issues to family dynamics and crisis situations. For the first time in years, I felt intellectually stimulated and professionally valued. My classmates and instructors recognized that my hands-on experience gave me insights that couldn't be learned from textbooks. I wasn't just a former caregiver trying to find a job. I was someone with valuable expertise who could help other families avoid the mistakes and challenges I had faced. The most difficult part of letting go was releasing the anger and resentment I felt toward Robert and his siblings. I had to accept that they would never acknowledge my sacrifice, never apologize for their treatment of me, never recognize the value of what I had given their family. But I also had to accept my own role in the situation. I had allowed myself to become so completely defined by my caregiving role that I had lost my sense of individual worth. I had been so focused on being needed that I had forgotten to maintain my own identity and independence. You can't control how other people treat you, my therapist reminded me during one of our sessions, but you can control how you respond to that treatment. You can choose to let their behavior define your worth, or you can choose to define your own value based on your actions and character. I chose to define my own value. I chose to see my 8 years of caring for Margaret not as wasted time or unappreciated sacrifice, but as preparation for a new career helping other families navigate similar challenges. I chose to see Robert's rejection not as evidence of my unworthiness, but as liberation from a relationship that never truly valued what I offered. 6 months after leaving Robert's house, I completed my certification program and began working as an aging life care manager. My first client was a family dealing with their father's early-stage dementia, a situation that mirrored my own experience with Margaret, but with very different dynamics. "We don't know how to help him," the daughter told me during our initial consultation. "We're all living in different states, and we're not sure what kind of care he needs or how to coordinate everything." I was able to help them develop a comprehensive care plan that allowed their father to remain in his own home while ensuring his safety and well-being. More importantly, I helped them understand how to share the responsibilities equitably and maintain their own lives while providing appropriate support. "You really understand what we're going through," the son told me after we had implemented the care plan. "It's clear that you've been where we are." That validation meant more to me than any appreciation I had ever received from Robert's family. These people valued my expertise, respected my knowledge, and compensated me fairly for my services. I was no longer a family member providing free labor. I was a professional offering valuable services to people who needed them. The decision to let go had been painful, but necessary. I had released my attachment to people who couldn't appreciate what I offered, and in doing so, I had found people who could appreciate it. I had stopped defining myself through others' needs and started building an identity based on my own values and capabilities. The woman who had been told her job was complete was discovering that her most important work was just beginning.
2 years after walking away from Robert and his family, I stood in the office of my newly established aging life care management practice, reviewing the files of 12 families I was currently serving. The small space was nothing fancy, just 2 rooms in a professional building near the hospital, but it represented something I had never had before: complete independence and professional recognition for work that truly mattered. The journey to this point had been challenging but transformative. After completing my certification, I had worked for an established care management agency for 18 months, learning the business side of the profession while building my skills and confidence. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, had been impressed by my natural ability to connect with both clients and their families. "You have something that can't be taught," she told me during my annual review. "You understand the emotional complexity of family caregiving in a way that most people in this field don't. Your clients trust you because they know you've walked in their shoes." That trust had translated into success. Families specifically requested to work with me, and my caseload grew steadily. I developed a reputation for being able to navigate even the most difficult family dynamics, helping siblings who hadn't spoken in years coordinate their parents' care, mediating between family members with different ideas about treatment options, and providing emotional support to overwhelmed caregivers. But working for someone else's agency, no matter how supportive, felt limiting after my experience of having my contributions undervalued. I wanted to build something that reflected my own values and approach to elder care, something that honored both the dignity of aging adults and the challenges faced by their families. The decision to start my own practice was terrifying. At 57, I was launching a business with limited savings, no family support, and the memory of financial devastation still fresh in my mind. But I had learned that security based on other people's approval was an illusion. The only real security came from building something that belonged entirely to me. I started small, working from my apartment and meeting clients in their homes or at coffee shops. My first independent client was Eleanor, an 82-year-old woman whose children lived across the country and were struggling to coordinate her care after a fall that had left her afraid to live alone. "I don't want to be a burden," Eleanor told me during our first meeting, "but I also don't want to give up my independence." I helped Eleanor and her family develop a plan that allowed her to remain in her own home with appropriate support services. We arranged for a home health aide, coordinated with her doctors to manage her medications, and set up technology that allowed her children to monitor her well-being remotely. But more importantly, I helped Eleanor maintain her sense of dignity and autonomy throughout the process. Instead of making decisions for her, I ensured that she remained the primary decision maker about her own life, with her family and care team providing support rather than control. "You treat me like a person, not a problem to be solved," Eleanor told me after we had implemented her care plan. "That means everything to me." Word spread quickly in our small community. Families who had struggled with elder care challenges began seeking my services, drawn by my reputation for treating both aging adults and their families with respect and understanding. Within 6 months, I had enough clients to rent off the space and hire an assistant. The work was emotionally demanding, but deeply fulfilling. Every day, I helped families navigate crises that I understood intimately. The guilt of not being able to provide care personally, the stress of coordinating multiple services, the grief of watching a loved one decline, the family conflicts that arose when people were overwhelmed and frightened. I also began offering support groups for family caregivers, drawing on my own experience to help others avoid the isolation and burnout that had nearly destroyed me. These monthly meetings became some of the most meaningful work I did, providing a safe space for people to share their struggles and learn from each other's experiences. "I thought I was the only one going through this," one caregiver told me after her first group meeting. "It helps so much to know that other people understand what it's like." The financial rebuilding was gradual but steady. I was earning more than I ever had as a nurse, and for the first time in my adult life, every dollar I earned was the direct result of my own efforts and expertise. I was able to move to a larger apartment, start rebuilding my retirement savings, and even begin planning for future expansion of my practice. But the most important change was internal. I had developed an unshakable confidence in my own worth and capabilities. I no longer needed other people's approval to feel valuable, no longer defined myself through my relationships with others, no longer sacrificed my own needs to meet someone else's expectations. This new confidence was tested when Robert reached out to me about a year after I had left. His father had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, and Robert's siblings were pressuring him to take primary responsibility for his care. He doesn't know how to do what you did, he admitted during our phone conversation. I don't have your patience or your knowledge. Would you consider helping us develop a care plan? The request was both validating and ironic. The man who had dismissed my contributions to his mother's care was now asking for my professional expertise to help with his father's needs. The family that had treated me as disposable now recognized that I possessed valuable skills they couldn't replicate. I agreed to consult with them, but on strictly professional terms. I charged my standard rates, maintained clear boundaries, and treated them exactly as I would any other client family. Robert seemed surprised by my business-like approach, perhaps expecting me to provide services based on our former relationship. "This feels so formal," he said during our planning meeting. "We used to be family." "We used to be a lot of things," I replied. "Now I'm a professional providing services that you need. That's a much clearer and more honest relationship than what we had before." The consultation was successful. I helped them develop a comprehensive care plan that distributed responsibilities among all the siblings and ensured their father received appropriate care. But more importantly, it demonstrated to me how completely I had transformed my relationship with that family and with myself. I was no longer the woman who had sacrificed everything for people who couldn't appreciate what she offered. I was a professional who provided valuable services to people who needed them, including former family members who now had to pay for expertise they had once taken for granted. The practice continued to grow, and I began receiving referrals from doctors, social workers, and other professionals who recognized the quality of my work. I hired additional staff, expanded our service offerings, and began developing educational programs for healthcare providers about the importance of family-centered elder care. I also started dating again, something I never imagined would be possible after the devastation of my marriage. I met David, a retired social worker who understood the demands of caregiving professions and appreciated my dedication to helping families in crisis. "You've turned your pain into purpose," he told me one evening as we discussed our respective careers. "That takes incredible strength and wisdom." Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than need or desperation. David didn't see me as someone to be rescued or fixed. He saw me as a complete person with valuable contributions to make to the world. 3 years after starting my practice, I was invited to speak at a national conference on aging and family caregiving. My presentation focused on the importance of supporting family caregivers and recognizing their expertise and contributions. Family caregivers are often the unsung heroes of our healthcare system, I told the audience of professionals. They provide billions of dollars worth of unpaid care, often at great personal cost. We need to value their contributions, support their efforts, and learn from their experiences. The response was overwhelming. I received dozens of requests for consultation, speaking engagements, and collaboration on research projects. My expertise was being recognized at a national level, and I was being invited to help shape policies and practices that would benefit other families facing similar challenges. As I flew home from the conference, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me to this point. 4 years ago, I was a woman who felt worthless and discarded, whose 8 years of sacrifice had been dismissed as a job that was now complete. Today, I was a successful entrepreneur, a recognized expert, and a person who had turned her most painful experience into meaningful work that helped others. The rebuilding process had taught me that my worth was not determined by other people's ability to appreciate my contributions. I had value that existed independent of anyone else's recognition or approval. I had skills and knowledge that could make a real difference in the world, and I had the strength to build something meaningful from even the most devastating losses. The woman who had been told her job was complete had discovered that her most important work was just beginning. 5 years after Robert and his siblings had dismissed me as having completed my job, I stood before an audience of 500 healthcare professionals at the National Conference on Aging and Family Caregiving, delivering the keynote address on transforming family caregiving from burden to partnership.
The woman who had once been treated as disposable help was now recognized as a leading expert in geriatric care management and family support systems. My practice, Compassionate Care Solutions, had grown beyond anything I had imagined when I started working from my tiny apartment. We now employed 12 staff members, served over 200 families annually, and had been featured in national publications as a model for innovative elder care services. But the recognition that meant the most to me wasn't professional, it was personal. The families I served didn't just see me as a service provider. They saw me as someone who truly understood their struggles and could guide them through the most challenging periods of their lives with wisdom earned through experience. "You saved our family," one daughter told me after we had successfully coordinated care for her mother's final months. Not just by managing the logistics, but by helping us stay connected to each other and to Mom's dignity throughout the process. These testimonials reminded me daily why I had chosen this path, why I had transformed my own painful experience into a mission to help others navigate similar challenges with more support and less trauma than I had received. The business had evolved far beyond basic care management. We offered comprehensive family education programs, support groups for different types of caregiving situations, and consulting services for healthcare facilities wanting to improve their family-centered care approaches. I had also written a book, The Invisible Caregivers, honoring the unsung heroes of elder care, which had become a bestseller and established me as a thought leader in the field. The book combined research on family caregiving with personal stories, including my own, that illustrated both the challenges and the potential for growth that came with caring for aging loved ones. "Your book changed how I think about my role as a caregiver," one reader wrote to me. "I realized that what I was doing had value and meaning, even when my family didn't always appreciate it." My personal life had also flourished in ways I never expected. David and I had married 2 years earlier, and a small ceremony attended by friends, colleagues, and several of the families I had served. Our relationship was everything my marriage to Robert hadn't been, built on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep appreciation for each other's individual strengths and experiences. David had become an integral part of my work, using his background in social work to help develop our family counseling programs. Together, we had created a comprehensive approach to elder care that addressed not just the practical needs of aging adults, but the emotional and relational challenges faced by their families. "We make a good team," he told me one evening as we reviewed applications for our new scholarship program, which provided free services to families who couldn't afford care management services. The scholarship program was particularly meaningful to me because it ensured that the support I wish I had received during Margaret's illness was available to other families facing similar challenges without the isolation and financial devastation that had marked my own experience. I had also become involved in policy advocacy, working with legislators to develop better support systems for family caregivers. My testimony before congressional committees had helped shape legislation providing tax credits for caregiving expenses and funding for respite care programs. "Your voice carries weight because you speak from experience," one senator told me after a hearing on family caregiver support. "When you talk about the challenges and the lack of support, people listen because they know you've lived it." The contrast with my previous life was stark and empowering. During my marriage to Robert, I was invisible, my contributions taken for granted and my expertise dismissed. Now I was sought after for my knowledge, respected for my experience, and compensated fairly for my services. The relationship with Robert and his family had settled into complete indifference. I occasionally heard updates through mutual acquaintances. Robert had remarried, his father had passed away after a brief illness, the siblings had sold their mother's house and distributed the proceeds as planned. I felt no satisfaction in learning that Robert's second marriage had struggled under the stress of caring for his father, or that his siblings had criticized his handling of his father's final months. Their difficulties didn't validate my worth. I had already established that through my own achievements. The most meaningful recognition came when I was invited to establish a research center on family caregiving at the local university. The Margaret Morrison Center for Family Caregiving Excellence, named in honor of my former mother-in-law, which study best practices in family support and develop training programs for healthcare professionals. We want you to lead this initiative because you understand both the academic and the practical sides of caregiving. Your combination of lived experience and professional expertise is exactly what this field needs. The center represented the culmination of everything I had learned about transforming personal pain into professional purpose. Margaret's memory would be honored not through the gratitude of family members who had dismissed my contributions, but through research and programs that would help thousands of other families navigate similar challenges with better support and understanding. As I prepared for my keynote address that morning, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, I was a woman who felt worthless and discarded, whose years of sacrifice had been dismissed as a job that was now complete. Today, I was a successful entrepreneur, a recognized expert, and a person who had built something meaningful and lasting from the ashes of betrayal. The most important thing I've learned, I told the conference audience, is that our worth is not determined by other people's ability to appreciate our contributions. When we stop seeking validation from those who cannot see our value, we become free to build relationships and careers with people who can. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just recognition of my professional achievements. It was validation of the journey I had taken, from invisibility to influence, from being dismissed to being celebrated, from having my job declared complete to discovering that my most important work was just beginning. After the conference, I was approached by dozens of healthcare professionals who wanted to learn more about our model of family-centered care. I exchanged contact information with researchers, administrators, and clinicians who were committed to improving support for family caregivers. But the conversation that moved me most was with a young woman who introduced herself as a family caregiver for her grandmother with Alzheimer's disease. She told me that she had been caring for her grandmother for 3 years, and her family took it for granted, and she sometimes felt invisible and unappreciated. My speech reminded her that what she was doing mattered, even if they didn't always see it. It matters tremendously, I assured her. And when you're ready, there are people and resources available to support you. You don't have to do this alone. As I flew home that evening, I thought about the woman I had been 5 years earlier, isolated, exhausted, and convinced that her value was tied to other people's recognition. That woman could never have imagined the life I was living now, the impact I was having, and the sense of purpose and fulfillment that defined my days. The new beginning I had created wasn't just about professional success or personal vindication, though that was important. It was about discovering who I was when I stopped defining myself through other people's needs and started building an identity based on my own values and capabilities. I had learned that being dismissed by people who couldn't see my worth wasn't a reflection of my value. It was an opportunity to find people who could appreciate what I offered and to build something that honored both my experience and my aspirations. The woman who was told her job was complete discovered that her most meaningful work was just beginning, and that beginning was more beautiful than anything she had lost. 7 years after Robert and his siblings had dismissed me from their family, I was leaving a professional conference in the city when I spotted a familiar figure sitting alone in the hotel lobby. It took me a moment to recognize Janet, Robert's sister, who looked significantly older and more worn than I remembered. She was staring at her phone with an expression of deep distress. I hesitated, debating whether to approach her or simply walk past. We had no contact since the day they told me my job was complete, and I had built my new life without any reference to or dependence on their family.
But something about her posture, the slump of her shoulders, the way she seemed lost in the busy lobby, reminded me of how I had felt during my darkest days. "Janet, are you all right?" She looked up, startled, and I saw that her eyes were red from crying. "Deanna, I didn't expect to see you here." "I was speaking at the geriatric care conference," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "What brings you to the city?" Her face crumbled. "Medical appointments for my husband. He's been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease." The irony was staggering. The woman who had dismissed my 8 years of caring for her mother was now facing the same devastating diagnosis with her own spouse. "I'm so sorry," I said, and I meant it. "How long have you known?" "6 months," she whispered. "We started noticing memory problems, confusion about things that should have been simple. The diagnosis was confirmed last week." She went on to describe the familiar progression, the initial denial, the desperate search for alternative explanations, and the devastating confirmation that their worst fears were true. I listened with the compassion I would show any family facing this diagnosis, setting aside our complicated history to focus on her immediate pain. "I don't know how to do this," she continued.
"I don't know how to care for someone with dementia. I don't know how to manage the medications, the behavioral changes, the safety issues. I keep thinking about how you cared for Mom, and I realize I have no idea how you did it." The admission was both validating and heartbreaking. The woman who had treated my expertise as worthless was now recognizing that I had possessed knowledge and skills she couldn't replicate. "It's overwhelming at first," I said gently, "but there are resources available now that didn't exist when I was caring for your mother. There are support groups, professional services, educational programs. You don't have to do this alone." "But I can't afford professional help," she said, tears streaming down her face. "My husband's medical bills are already enormous, and I'll have to quit my job to care for him. We're looking at financial ruin, just like you and Robert faced." I realized she had no idea about my current circumstances, no knowledge of the successful practice I had built and the expertise I had developed. To her, I was still the struggling woman who had been dismissed from their family 7 years earlier. "Janet, I need to tell you something," I said carefully. "I'm not the same person I was when I left your family. I've built a career in geriatric care management. I help families navigate exactly the situation you're facing now." She stared at me in disbelief. "You're a professional caregiver?" "I'm a licensed aging life care manager. I run a practice that serves over 200 families dealing with dementia and other age-related challenges. I help coordinate care, manage services, and support family members through the process." The conversation that followed was complex and emotional. Janet expressed amazement at my transformation, guilt about how their family had treated me, and desperate hope that I might be able to help her navigate her husband's illness. "I can't believe you turned what happened with Mom into a career," she said. "We treated you so badly, and you used that experience to help other people." "I had to find meaning in what I had been through," I explained. "I couldn't let those 8 years of experience go to waste, even if your family didn't value them." She was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what I had told her. Could you help us? I know I have no right to ask, but I don't know where else to turn." I considered her request carefully. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect myself from any entanglement with the family that had caused me so much pain. But another part of me recognized an opportunity, not for revenge, but for closure, for the chance to demonstrate how much I had grown and changed. "I can provide you with information about resources in your area. I can recommend care managers who specialize in dementia care, but I can't be your family's care manager. That would be too complicated given our history." "I understand," she said quickly. I just, I need to know how to start. I need to know what questions to ask, what services are available, how to prepare for what's coming. Over the next hour, I provided Janet with a comprehensive overview of dementia care resources, explained the progression of the disease, and helped her understand what to expect in the coming months and years. I gave her contact information for care managers in her area, support groups for spouses of dementia patients, and organizations that provided financial assistance for families facing these challenges. "This is exactly what we needed when Mom was sick," she said as I finished explaining the available resources. "If we had known about these services, if we had understood what you were dealing with, maybe we would have been more supportive." "Maybe," I agreed. "But you can't change the past. You can only learn from it and do better going forward." As we prepared to part ways, Janet reached across the table and took my hand. "Deanna, I need to say something. What we did to you was wrong. We treated you like hired help instead of family. We dismissed your contributions and abandoned you when you needed support. I'm ashamed of how we behaved." "Thank you for saying that. It means something to hear you acknowledge what happened. I also need you to know that watching you succeed, seeing what you've built from what we put you through, it's incredible. You turned our cruelty into something beautiful. You're helping families avoid the mistakes we made." I had to find meaning in what I had been through, I explained. I couldn't let those 8 years of experience go to waste, even if your family didn't value them. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what I had told her. Could you help us? I know I have no right to ask, but I don't know where else to turn." I considered her request carefully. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect myself from any entanglement with the family that had caused me so much pain. But another part of me recognized an opportunity, not for revenge, but for closure, for the chance to demonstrate how much I had grown and changed. "I can provide you with information about resources in your area. I can recommend care managers who specialize in dementia care, but I can't be your family's care manager. That would be too complicated given our history." "I understand," she said quickly. I need to know how to start. I need to know what questions to ask, what services are available, how to prepare for what's coming." Over the next hour, I provided Janet with a comprehensive overview of dementia care resources, explained the progression of the disease, and helped her understand what to expect in the coming months and years. I gave her contact information for care managers in her area, support groups for spouses of dementia patients, and organizations that provided financial assistance for families facing these challenges. "This is exactly what we needed when Mom was sick," she said as I finished explaining the available resources. "If we had known about these services, if we had understood what you were dealing with, maybe we would have been more supportive." "Maybe," I agreed, "but you can't change the past. You can only learn from it and do better going forward." As we prepared to part ways, Janet reached across the table and took my hand. "Deanna, I need to say something. What we did to you was wrong. We treated you like hired help instead of family. We dismissed your contributions and abandoned you when you needed support. I'm ashamed of how we behaved." "Thank you for saying that. It means something to hear you acknowledge what happened. I also need you to know that watching you succeed, seeing what you've built from what we put you through, it's incredible. You turned our cruelty into something beautiful. You're helping families avoid the mistakes we made." Her words were gratifying, but they weren't necessary for my peace of mind. I had long since stopped needing their validation to know my worth. "I hope your husband's journey is easier than your mother's was," I said, sincerely, "and I hope you can find the support and resources you need to care for him while also taking care of yourself." 6 months later, I received a letter from Janet. She had connected with one of the care managers I had recommended and had successfully arranged comprehensive support services for her husband. More importantly, she had joined a support group for caregiving spouses and was learning to maintain her own well-being while providing appropriate care. "You saved us from making the same mistakes our family made with you. The care manager you recommended helped us understand that caregiving should be a team effort, not a burden placed on one person. My husband is getting excellent care, and I'm not sacrificing my own health and sanity in the process." The encounter had provided something I hadn't known I needed. Not an apology, though that was meaningful, but confirmation that my transformation had been complete and authentic. I had faced the family that had dismissed me not as a victim seeking vindication, but as a professional offering assistance to people in need. I had shown compassion without compromising my boundaries, provided help without sacrificing my dignity, and demonstrated that success was the best response to those who had underestimated my worth. The encounter reminded me that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, that you can wish people well without welcoming them back into your life, and that sometimes the greatest victory is having the strength to help others even when they once failed to help you.
10 years after Robert and his siblings had told me my job was complete, I stood in the auditorium of the Margaret Morrison Center for Family Caregiving Excellence, watching 200 healthcare professionals, family caregivers, and researchers participate in our annual symposium. The center, named in honor of the woman whose care had defined 8 years of my life, had become a nationally recognized leader in developing support systems for family caregivers. The irony wasn't lost on me that Margaret's memory was being honored, not through the gratitude of family members who had dismissed my contributions, but through an institution that ensured other families would receive the support and recognition that had been denied to me. The symposium's theme was From Invisible to Essential, Recognizing and Supporting Family Caregivers, and the keynote speaker was Dr. Sarah Chin, a researcher whose work on caregiver burden had been influenced by the programs we had developed at the center. Family caregivers provide over $470 billion worth of unpaid care annually, Dr. Chin told the audience, yet they remain largely invisible to healthcare systems and social support networks. The work being done here at the Morrison Center is changing that, one family at a time. I sat in the front row, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The center had grown beyond my wildest expectations, conducting research that was shaping national policy, training healthcare professionals in family-centered care approaches, and providing direct services to hundreds of families each year. Our scholarship program had expanded to serve 50 families annually, ensuring that financial constraints didn't prevent access to care management services. Our support groups had become models for similar programs across the country. Our research on caregiver resilience and post-traumatic growth had been published in major journals and cited by policymakers developing legislation to support family caregivers. But perhaps most importantly, we had created a community where family caregivers were seen, heard, and valued for their contributions. The center had become a place where people like I had been, isolated, overwhelmed, and underappreciated, could find support, resources, and recognition for their sacrificial service. During the lunch break, I was approached by Maria Santos, a woman whose story reminded me of my own. She had cared for her father-in-law with dementia for 6 years, while her husband's siblings lived in other states and provided minimal support. When he passed away, they had excluded her from inheritance decisions and treated her as if her years of service had been a job rather than an act of love. "Your book saved my sanity," she told me. "Reading about your experience helped me realize that I wasn't crazy, that what I was feeling was valid, and that I could build something meaningful from what I had been through."
Maria had used her experience to become a certified care manager and now worked with our center, specializing in supporting caregivers who felt isolated and undervalued by their families. You showed me that being dismissed by people who couldn't see my worth wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of discovering what I was really capable of. These conversations reminded me daily why I had chosen to transform my pain into purpose, why I had built something that honored both Margaret's memory and the experiences of countless other caregivers who had been taken for granted. My relationship with David had deepened into something beautiful and sustaining. We had celebrated our 5th anniversary the previous month, and our partnership continued to be everything my marriage to Robert hadn't been, built on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep appreciation for each other's individual contributions to our shared mission. David had become the center's research director, using his background in social work to develop studies on family dynamics during caregiving crises. Together, we had created a comprehensive approach to supporting families that addressed not just the practical needs of care recipients, but the emotional and relational challenges faced by their caregivers. "We've built something that will outlast us," he told me one evening as we reviewed applications for our new fellowship program, which would train the next generation of family-centered care professionals. "The impact we're having will continue long after we're gone." The relationship with Robert and his family had settled into complete irrelevance. I occasionally heard updates through mutual acquaintances. Robert's second marriage had ended in divorce, partly due to stress from caring for his father during his final illness. His siblings had struggled with their own aging parents and had apparently gained new appreciation for the challenges I had faced with their mother. But their belated understanding didn't matter to me anymore. I had long since stopped needing their validation or acknowledgment. My worth was established through the families I served, the professionals I trained, and the research that was changing how society viewed and supported family caregivers. The most meaningful recognition had come the previous year when I was awarded the National Association of Social Workers Lifetime Achievement Award for my contributions to elder care and family support. The ceremony had been attended by hundreds of colleagues, former clients, and current staff members who had become like family to me. "Diana Morrison has transformed personal tragedy into professional triumph," the presenter had said. "Her work has touched thousands of lives and changed how we think about the role of family caregivers in our healthcare system." But the recognition that moved me most came from unexpected sources. I regularly received letters from family caregivers who had read my book, attended my presentations, or participated in our programs. They wrote about feeling seen and understood for the first time, about finding the courage to seek help, about learning to value their own contributions even when others didn't. One letter in particular had brought me to tears. It was from a man who had cared for his wife with early-onset Alzheimer's for 12 years, while their adult children lived their own lives and provided minimal support. "Your work helped me understand that I wasn't a martyr or a victim. I was a person providing valuable service that deserved recognition and support. That shift in perspective saved my sanity and probably my life." As the symposium concluded that afternoon, I stood before the audience to deliver closing remarks. Looking out at the faces of healthcare professionals, researchers, and family caregivers, I felt a profound sense of completion. 10 years ago, I was told that my job as a family caregiver was complete. The people I had served for 8 years dismissed my contributions and erased me from their family as if I had never existed. At the time, I thought that was the end of my story. I paused, seeing nods of recognition from audience members who had faced similar dismissals and rejections. But I learned that being undervalued by people who couldn't see my worth wasn't a reflection of my value. It was an opportunity to find people who could see what I offered. Today, we have created a community where family caregivers are recognized as the experts they are, where their contributions are valued, and where their voices are heard. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just recognition of my professional achievements, It was validation of the journey from invisibility to influence, from being dismissed to being celebrated, from having my job declared complete to discovering that my most important work was just beginning. After the event, as I walked through the center that bared Margaret's name, I thought about the woman who had welcomed me into her family with such warmth and love. I hoped she would be proud of how her memory was being honored, not through the gratitude of family members who had failed to appreciate my sacrifice, but through an institution that ensured other caregivers would receive the support and recognition that they deserved. The circle was complete, but it had led to a place of purpose and meaning that exceeded anything I had lost. The woman who was told her job was complete discovered that her most meaningful work was creating a world where no other caregiver would face the isolation and dismissal that had nearly destroyed her. I had come full circle, but to a much better place than where I had started. As I write these final words, 15 years have passed since Robert and his siblings told me my job was complete and dismissed me from their family. I am now 70 years old, and I can say with absolute certainty that being discarded by people who couldn't see my worth was the catalyst for discovering my true purpose and building a legacy that will outlast my lifetime. The Margaret Morrison Center for Family Caregiving Excellence has become a model for institutions worldwide. We have trained over 2,000 healthcare professionals in family-centered care approaches, served more than 1,500 families directly, and influenced policy changes that have improved support for millions of family caregivers across the country. My fourth book, The Complete Circle, From Caregiver to Advocate, was published last year and has become required reading in social work and nursing programs. But the numbers and accolades, while gratifying, aren't what matter most. What matters is the transformation I see in every family caregiver who discovers that their contributions have value, that their expertise matters, and that they deserve support and recognition for their sacrificial service. David and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary last month. Our partnership continues to be the foundation of both our personal happiness and our professional mission. Together, we have created something that honors both our individual experiences and our shared commitment to ensuring that no family caregiver faces the isolation and dismissal that nearly destroyed me. We have also become grandparents through David's children, and watching our grandchildren grow has reminded me of the importance of leaving a legacy that extends beyond professional achievements. They will inherit a world where family caregivers are better supported and more valued because of the work we have done. The relationship with Robert and his family has become completely irrelevant to my sense of worth and purpose. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Robert passed away 2 years ago after a brief illness. I felt sadness for the loss of life, but no personal grief for the man who had failed to appreciate what I offered his family. Janet had reached out after Robert's death, expressing regret about their family's treatment of me and gratitude for the help I had provided when her husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Her husband had passed away the previous year, and she had become an advocate for caregiver support in her own community. "You showed us a different way," she wrote in her letter, "not just how to care for someone with dementia, but how to transform difficult experiences into meaningful service to others." Her acknowledgment was appreciated, but no longer necessary for my peace of mind. I had long since stopped needing validation from people who had once dismissed my worth. To every family caregiver who has been told their contributions don't matter, who has been treated as invisible help rather than a valued family member, who has sacrificed everything only to be discarded when their usefulness ended, I want you to know that your worth is not determined by other people's ability to appreciate what you give. To every person who has been dismissed, undervalued, or erased from situations where they provided essential service, I want you to know that being underestimated by people who lack vision is not a reflection of your limitations, but an opportunity to find people who can see your true potential. To every individual who has faced devastating loss and wondered if they could ever rebuild their life, I want you to know that endings can become beginnings, that pain can become purpose, and that the person who emerges from crisis is often stronger and wiser than the person who was broken. The journey from dismissal to recognition, from invisibility to influence, from having your job declared complete to discovering your most important work is not easy. There will be moments when you doubt your worth, when the voices of those who diminished you echo in your mind, when starting over seems impossible. But I promise you this: if you refuse to let other people's inability to see your value define your worth, if you have the courage to build something that reflects your true capabilities, if you choose purpose over bitterness and growth over resentment, you will discover strength and possibilities you never knew existed. You will find that you are more resilient than you imagined, more capable than you believed, more deserving of recognition and respect than you were taught to think. You will discover that the person who rises from the ashes of rejection is often more authentic, more purposeful, and more powerful than the person who was destroyed. I am not the same woman who stood in that living room 15 years ago, listening to Robert's siblings tell me that my job was complete and my presence was no longer needed. That woman was defined by other people's approval, other people's recognition, other people's definition of her worth. The woman I am today knows that real value comes from the impact you have on the world, not from the appreciation you receive from those who benefit from your service. I know that being dismissed by people who lack vision is not a limitation. It's liberation to find people who can see what you're truly capable of achieving. Most importantly, I have learned that no one has the power to declare your job complete except you. Your worth is not determined by other people's gratitude or recognition. Your value exists independently of anyone else's ability to appreciate it. The woman who was told her caregiving job was complete discovered that her most important work was just beginning, work that would honor the memory of those she had served while ensuring that future caregivers would receive the support and recognition they deserved. If my story has inspired you, if it has given you courage to pursue your own transformation, if it has reminded you that your worth is not dependent on other people's appreciation, then every moment of pain and struggle was worthwhile. Your story is not over. Your most meaningful contributions may still be ahead of you. The experiences that others have dismissed as insignificant may be exactly what prepares you for your greatest purpose. Trust your value. Honor your experience. Build something that matters. And remember, you have always been more than other people's limited vision could see. You just needed to stop seeking their approval and start building your own legacy. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing in the power of transformation, resilience, and the courage to turn pain into purpose. Now go create something beautiful from whatever you've been through. The world needs what only you can build from your unique experience and hard-won wisdom. You are not done. Your most important work is just beginning.